Good afternoon, everyone, and happy Friday. I hope you've been working hard this week. We have to make our brains work hard. We have to work hard to get our bodies to work hard, to get exercise. So I hope you've been working hard. How about a little relaxation right now? Yesterday, we started our biography, Who Was Stan Lee? And we are now on chapter 3, The Teenager Takes Over. Remember, he went to work at a publishing company at the age of, 17? And so now we're going to see how his life is beginning as an adult. So as Stan was assigned, how about if I read it this way? As Stan was assigned more writing jobs, Joe and Jack were assigned fewer. Mr. Goodman could be difficult. He didn't like to pay the artist much, and they were not happy about it. So Joe and Jack decided to quit. I looked around to see who would replace them, and I realized there was nobody. Stan said later, I was the only guy there. Stan had lots of ideas for stories, but couldn't draw well. So he worked closely with the artist. He also continued as the company's editor, though it was sometimes hard to be an 18-year-old boss. Some days, Stan would answer the office door and be asked, "Hey kid, where can I find Mr. Lee?" And for about a year, Stan ran timely publications and wrote whatever Mr. Goodman wanted. He wrote westerns, mysteries, and horror, and even some romance stories. And as much as Stan loved his job, he was distracted. The United States had entered World War II, and Stan wanted to do his part. He decided to volunteer for the Army and reported for duty in the winter of 1942. There he is there. Stan's military classification was playwright. Because of his work experience, Stan was given a job writing slogans, manuals, and training films for the U.S. government. This was a rare assignment. Only 8 other people have ever been classified as playwright by the U.S. Army, including film director Frank Capra, novelist William Saroyan, and Theodore Geisel, better known as Dr. Seuss. Remarkably, Stan kept working for Timely while he was in the Army. The company would mail Stan ideas, and he would send finished stories back to them from wherever he was stationed. Here he is here. As much as Stan liked serving his country, he was thrilled when the war ended in 1945. He couldn't wait to get back to the world of comics. Chapter 4, Joni. World War II ended. Stan returned to New York to take over again as Timely's editor. It was a job he would keep for over 25 years until 1972 when he became publisher. Stan was having the time of his life. He rented a 2-room apartment in the Almanac Hotel and bought a big white car. It was the first brand new car he had ever owned. Here he is here. Then things got even better. A friend wanted to introduce Stan to a model named Betty. His friend thought that Betty and Stan would make a great couple. And when Stan showed up at the modeling agency, the most beautiful woman he had ever seen answered the door. There was only one problem. She wasn't Betty. She was a young woman named Joan. Joan Clayton Bucock had red hair and blue eyes and a great sense of humor. She had moved from England to New York to work as a hat model. And in the 1940s, women wore hats every day. And the hat models had to be beautiful. Their faces were featured in advertisements, in newspapers, and magazines. Stan wasn't one to hold back his feelings. There she is. Her name is Joan Clayton. "I love you," he blurted out that first day, and Joan laughed, but she agreed to go on a date. On December 5th, 1947, Stan and Joan became husband and wife. They were married by the same judge who had granted Joan a divorce from her first husband just moments before. Stan wanted to marry Joan quickly, but she could change her mind. Stan was thrilled and called his beautiful new bride Joni. The young couple moved to an apartment close to Timely's offices in Manhattan. The place was so small it barely fit more than their bed, but Stan and Joni didn't mind. They spent nights out dancing with their friends. Life was great. 2 years later, Stan and Joan moved to a house on Long Island, just outside of New York City. When Stan's mother Celia died, his younger brother Larry was only 15 years old. He moved into the new house with Stan and Joni. So he had his little brother come to live. And there they are, the couple. And it's a good thing they had much more space. In 1950, Stan and Joan had a baby girl, Joan Celia, and they were heartbroken 3 years later when a second daughter, Jan, died a few days after she was born. The doctors told Joni she couldn't have any more children. Stan loved their daughter, JC. He would put her on his shoulders and carry her around their big yard, and he took pictures of her with their loving German shepherds, Blackie and Simba. And in order to spend more time with JC, Stan tried to work at home as much as possible. And here they are here. JC, his daughter, and the doggies. Happy not to be cooped up in Timely's smoke-filled offices, Stan would work outside in the sun. He put his typewriter on a backyard table and worked while standing up. Sometimes friends would come over and keep Stan company. At other times, JC would have her own young friends over to the house. It was difficult not to notice Stan when he was hard at work. While he wrote comic books, Stan liked to read all the words out loud. It helped him make his superheroes sound right. Pow! Zap! He would shout all the most dramatic parts. JC's friends sometimes wondered why her father was making all that noise. JC told them not to worry. That was just her father at work. Here's his typewriter. Zap! Pow! Bam! Chapter 5. Comics Under Attack. Not everybody loved comics as much as Stan did. Starting in the early 1940s, some adults complained that comic books were bad for children. Why? They were filled with violence, bloody details, and horrific stories. People were afraid that comics would influence young people in dangerous ways. In 1948, angry parents even held public comic book burnings in Binghamton, New York, and Spencer, West Virginia. And in 1949, the very popular Family Circle magazine published a story called "What Can You Do About Comic Books?" The article told parents they need to read comic books before their children did to make sure they were safe and not too violent. Stan and the other comic book creators didn't take the complaints very seriously. Business was still very good. But in 1954, Frederick Wertham, a child psychologist, wrote a book called Seduction of the Innocent. Dr. Wertham said that comics were dangerous to children. His ideas led to congressional hearings in Washington, D.C. about whether to outlaw comic books. Some stores even stopped selling them to children. Oops, there we go. The congressional hearings had a huge impact on sales. 15 comic book companies went out of business in 1954 alone. The remaining publishers did their best to survive. Together they founded the Comics Code Authority. They wrote their own rules to make sure comic books didn't include stories that would upset parents or politicians. Here we go. There's a bunch of comic book covers right here. And they believed in their business, so they were going to try. The Comics Code Authority had to approve every comic book before it was printed. If approved, the comic could use the Comics Code seal of approval on its front cover. That meant it was safe for children to read. And then it details the whole Comics Code Authority. right here. Chapter 6, Marvel is born. By 1960, Stan had been working on comic books for 20 years. But he really wasn't having much fun anymore. Comic books were not selling. Kids were more interested in television shows and rock and roll music than old superheroes. Even Captain America was canceled due to low sales. Stan couldn't help thinking of the good old days when Jack Kirby in the smoky rooms at Timely. He missed the old team and the excitement he used to feel when he came to work. He told Joni that he was going to quit. He was planning to stomp into Mr. Goodman's office and tell him that he was through with comics. There was only one problem. Just when he was ready to quit, Mr. Goodman offered Stan an exciting new challenge. A rival company, DC Comics, had just put out a comic book, The Justice League of America. Oh, I think you've heard of that. Instead of just one superhero, the comic book included 7 of them working as a team. Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Flash, Green Lantern, Aquaman, and the Martian Manhunter. Justice League comics were flying off the shelf. Mr. Goodman asked Stan to create his own team. He even suggested bringing back Captain America and the Human Torch. And when Stan told Joni about Mr. Goodman's idea, she told Stan that she would always support him. She knew her husband better than anybody. She knew he loved a creative challenge. You know, Stan, Joni said, if Martin wants you to create a new group of superheroes, this could be a chance for you to do it in a way you've always wanted to. By that, she meant that Stan had nothing to lose. If he took too much of a risk and annoyed Mr. Goodman, he might get fired. That wouldn't matter to Stan because he had already planned to quit. But if he came up with something special, he might please Mr. Goodman and recapture the excitement of his early days at Timely. Stan didn't want to just bring back old characters. He wanted to create new ones. His new team would not be perfectly handsome like Superman or incredibly strong like Captain America. They would have the normal problems and weaknesses of regular people. Their lives would not always be easy. And Stan knew exactly who could help. His old partner, Jack. Jack Kirby. It had been years since Jack had quit his regular job at Timely Comics, but starting in 1958, Jack had been taking assignments from Stan. Now Stan needed something more. He needed Jack's help in creating a new generation of comic book heroes. The Fantastic Four were led by the brilliant scientist Reed Richards. Sue Storm hoped to marry Reed one day. Sue's younger brother, Johnny Storm, was the 3rd member of the team, but Stan and Jack's greatest creation was the final member of the Fantastic Four, Ben Grimm. Ben was a military pilot who was a friend of Reed's. It was Reed's dream to travel to outer space. He built a spacecraft and invited Ben, Sue, and Johnny along. And once in space, they were blasted by radiation, which gave each of them special powers. Here they are here. But Ben became deformed. The radiation turned him into a giant creature with an orange, rock-like skin. Depressed, Ben renamed himself The Thing. The Thing was a new kind of superhero. He grumbled and rolled his eyes. He wished he could go back to being his normal self, but he was incredibly loyal and also believed in fighting crime. Reed became the big-mouth Mr. Fantastic. Sue Storm became the invisible girl. Johnny Storm, who could now burst into flames at will, became the new Human Torch. And when the first comic book was published in 1961, readers loved the Fantastic Four. Their success convinced Stan that he had made the right decision to take on Mr. Goodman's challenge. It also gave him the confidence to create other unlikely heroes. And as a boy, Stan had read Robert Louis Stevenson's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The book told the story of one man with 2 very different personalities. Dr. Jekyll was a very good person, but Mr. Hyde, he was evil. For the new character, Stan came up with his own version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Dr. Bruce Banner was a mild-mannered scientist, but when he lost his temper or felt panicked, he turned into a green monster, the Hulk. The first Hulk appeared in 1962 in The Incredible Hulk #1 and became instantly popular among comic book fans. Stan's next comic team was a group of outcast mutants called the X-Men. Professor Xavier, their mentor, showed them that they also could be heroes. Stan was on a roll, but was very busy and needed help. He had the perfect guy for the job. He called his younger brother Larry. Larry Lieber had gone to art school and done some writing for Stan. Now they began to work together more closely. And over the next 2 years, Stan and Larry would help create 2 of their most popular characters, Thor and Iron Man. And there's the Hulk, Bruce Banner. When Larry got tired of drawing those characters, he launched a Western series called Rawhide Kid. Stan kept coming up with new characters, including Daredevil and Ant-Man. With so much success, Stan decided to make a big change. In the 1950s, Mr. Goodman had changed Timely's name to Atlas Comics, but Stan had thought the company needed a fresher name. Times were changing. Stan was developing comics with a new style and approach. Although he had gone back to using superheroes, this new wave of crime fighters was different. They had issues. They sometimes struggled with their superpowers and longed for their days as mere humans. Stan remembered the title used in one of the early comic books published by Timely, Marvel. He liked the sound of that, and Mr. Goodman agreed. Stan gave his crew of artists and writers at Marvel Comic nicknames and called the team his bullpen. The writers, artists, and inkers worked in the main room at Marvel. Stan wanted Marvel's readers to imagine the company as a big clubhouse where everybody hung out, told jokes, and developed amazing comic books. If readers had a question, they could send a letter directly to Stan. He would answer those letters on a page he put in every comic book called Bullpen and Bulletins. Stan had fun writing these pages, and he gave each bulletin a funny-sounding title at the top of the page, like More Mirthful, Monumental, Mind-Staggering Memoranda from Your Marvel Madmen. And Stan wrote an open letter to readers called Stan's Soapbox and came up with his own favorite terms like "Nuff Said" and Excelsior. Other comic book companies were brand Eck, Stan joked. Marvel Comics was king. And that's it for today, boys and girls. We will continue with Chapter 7 on Monday. Have a great weekend. Do some fun things out there, okay? Get some exercise. Enjoy your families, alrighty? Take care. Bye-bye.